Hello and welcome. Today we're examining the Biya regime. At the helm of Cameroon for over 4 decades is President Paul Biya, a man whose rule has been marred by corruption, economic mismanagement and human rights abuses. Biya's reign began in 1982, promising a brighter future for Cameroon. He pledged prosperity, unity and progress. He made bold statements promising rigor and moralization, communal liberalism and a New Deal system of governance. Instead, his tenure has been a masterclass in how to break promises and cling to power while a nation crumbles. The story of Cameroon under Biya is one of unfulfilled potential, squandered opportunities and a people yearning for change. Let's unpack this. Corruption in Cameroon isn't just a problem, it's the operating system. It's endemic in the public service. Under Biya, it's the only game in town. Let's examine a few cases. Remember the Lines 94 and 96 scandal at the Ministry of Finance? Billions of CFA francs paid out to friends over fraudulent contracts. The notorious Amugu Balinga, who is currently awaiting trial in an unrelated case, benefited from his friend Minister Louise Paul Motaz. Alarms were raised by local media since 2021, but the Biya regime, with its current style, took no action. How can such theft and fraud be shelved? The Biya regime protects thieves in high places. There's then the COVID-19 fund mismanagement. Remember when the world was grappling with a pandemic? Yeah. Cameroon received $226 million from the IMF to help, including funds from National Treasury. But guess what? Ministers disappeared billions of francs CFA. A government audit revealed close to 200 billion francs CFA was misappropriated, involving fake invoices, inflated procurement contracts, and non-existent deliveries of medical supplies. Names implicated include Manauda Malaki, the Minister of Health, Ferdinand Nyongo, the Secretary-General of the Presidency, and Atanga Nji Paul of Territorial Administration. The COVID-19 fund mismanagement demonstrated complicit theft amongst Biya's ministers, using high instructions purportedly coming from a president who can hardly understand state affairs based on his age. These instructions were used to draw funds out of state treasury. The Cameroonian people are aware of these thefts, and time for judgment of the regime is near. Because the president has proven disinterested in the people are also saying, enough. What about AFCON preparations? The government allocated over $1 billion for infrastructure projects. The Olembe Stadium in Yaoundé, for instance, faced massive cost overruns and delays. Many contracts were awarded to politically connected firms with little oversight. Minister Ferdinand Nyongo is again implicated in this scandal. The issue of corruption is compounded by lack of judicial independence. High-profile corruption cases rarely result in convictions, as the judiciary remains heavily influenced by the executive. Political opponents are targeted, while regime allies enjoy impunity. Let's talk economics. Under Biya, Cameroon's external debt has ballooned. It increased from $9.8 billion in 2018 to $14.8 billion in 2023, representing 45% of GDP. Debt servicing consumed 30% of public revenues in 2023. And where's all this borrowed money going? Not into the pockets of ordinary Cameroonians, that's for sure. Inflation is soaring, the cost of living is through the roof, and people are struggling to put food on the table. Fuel price jumped at the beginning of this year from 730 to 840 franc CFA per litre. Inflation surged to 6.5% in 2023, driven by food and energy prices. GDP growth fell from 4.1% in 2018 to 2.8% in 2023, reflecting economic stagnation. And the worst part? The government's response is more taxes. The 2024 Finance Bill tabled to Parliament includes controversial provisions requiring citizens to present tax compliance certificates during routine control of vehicles and as a requirement for visa applications and airport controls. It is feared fuel prices will hit 1,000 francs CFA in 2025. We see here a struggling government instituting disproportionate measures. The outlook for 2025 paints a much more bleak picture for ordinary Cameroonians. The clock is ticking, and Cameroonians will decide shortly. Now onto the picture of human rights. Looking at human rights. Under Biya, state security forces have become tools of oppression, routinely abusing citizens' rights. Police harassment is the order of the day. It's well known by the regime, yet no action is taken. Citizens are harassed by police and gendarmes with arbitrary demands for ID cards contrary to constitutional provisions of freedom of movement. At times, even with the presentation of ID cards, bribes are obliged by the police to release the individual. There is the Cameroon Human Rights Commission, but this body has been reduced to a mere research organ with no biting force. It only makes recommendations without any powers to ensure compliance. Torture and arbitrary detentions are reported by Citizens Amnesty International, documented numerous cases of torture in detention facilities. Political activists, Anglophone civilians and journalists are common targets. Journalist Samuel Wazizi died in military custody in 2020. Reportedly due to torture after being detained for reporting on the Anglophone crisis. The regime, in their recent representations before the UN Committee Against Torture, affirmed the Wazizi file is now closed. But how can this be without anyone held to account? Wazizi's family deserves answers. Cameroonians are interested to know about the steps the regime is taking to bring about clarity. Recently, there is the case of Martinez Zogo, brutally killed after being tortured. The case is pending before the judiciary, but Cameroonians fear the judiciary may not render justice because of its lack of independence. Indeed, there have been attempts to release some of the accused in this case. Cameroonians are watching. Then, with protest rights, the totalitarian regime considers protests as revolution and rebellion against the state. Sometimes terrorism charges are levied on peaceful protesters. Recent protests against election irregularities, economic policies, and government failures have been met with brutal repression. In 2019, peaceful protests by the Cameroon Renaissance movement led to mass arrests, with many activists detained without trial for years. Some of them are still languishing in jail, held under rebellion and revolution charges. It's a bleak picture for Cameroon. Looking at the Anglophone crisis and Boko Haram insurgency clearly shows a lack of either a political strategy or will to resolve them. It seems to me there is lack of political will to resolve the Anglophone crisis, with the regime preferring military option. The regime's heavy-handed response to grievances in the northwest and southwest regions has instead escalated the troubles. There has been over 7,000 deaths and the displacement of more than 1 million people by 2024. Key events have been the Ngabu massacre in 2020, where government forces killed 23 civilians, including children, epitomized the crisis's brutality. No one has been held to account. We cannot forget in a hurry the massacre of 7 school children in Kumba in 2020. The Biya regime has reduced citizens into tissue paper, where they think they owe no responsibility to account for their actions. This must stop. The Boko Haram insurgency is another example of the regime's misfit in dealing with conflict. In the far north, Boko Haram attacks have continued, displacing 340,000 people by 2024. Typical attacks have been that in Mayo Tsanaga in 2022 that killed dozens and highlighted the government's failure to secure the region. Paul Biya's presidency has been characterized by systemic corruption, economic mismanagement, human rights violations, and an inability to resolve crises. His age and frequent absences for medical treatment have left a leadership vacuum, compounding Cameroon's challenges. The 2025 elections represent a pivotal moment for Cameroon to reject stagnation and authoritarianism. Biya's four-decade tenure has proven incapable of delivering the accountability, prosperity and stability the nation desperately needs. It is time for new leadership to prioritize transparency, economic reform and the protection of citizens' rights. Cameroonians, the time to take action is now. Get ready for 2025 elections. Cameroon must break free from Biya's legacy of failed leadership. The 2025 elections offer an opportunity to demand accountability, economic reform and respect for human rights essential for the nation's progress. Thanks for watching.